Ladies
Okay.
and gentlemen, welcome back to Disco Shaman TV. Today I have a very special guest. His name is Dennis Mckenna. He has conducted research in ethnopharmacology for over 40 years. He is a founding board member of the Hefter Research Institute, which was a key investigator in the Huasca project, the first biomedical investigation of ayahuasca. He is the younger brother of the late, great Terence Mckenna, and also the founder of McKenna Academy School of Natural Philosophy. Dennis, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you very much, Hammad. I'm well, and thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Anytime. So, Dennis, the show is four questions. I ask you four questions, and we just free roll from there. We party from there.
Okay.
So, my question to you, number one, is how do plants essentially teach? There's this understanding that in shamanistic cultures, certain plants can be teachers. What is the core philosophy of plant teachers?
Well, it's yeah. In shamanic tradition, plants are often considered to be teachers.
Right.
And people learn from plants from the states of mind that they can induce. And this goes back to what we were talking about before we really started the podcast, the way that plants communicate with people or anybody else, other things in the environment, is through chemistry. And these psychoactive plants can open up states of mind, uh, and it can open up, essentially alternate realities, and people can explore those, and from that, uh, people learn. And basically, in the teaching dynamic, there's someone is learning and someone is doing the teaching, although sometimes it's a two-way relationship. I feel like I'm a teacher, right? I've been a teacher for
Right.
many years, but I've also learned a great deal from my students. So
The
it's a
teacher must be
two-way.
learning always.
Yeah, it's not always me, it's not always a one-way process. But this notion of plants being teachers is very much integrated into the shamanic worldview, and plants are actually conceived as intelligent entities that teach us, that they have wisdom. Now, some people say that's a misconception. They're not really intelligent, but actually, I think there's plenty of scientific evidence now to indicate that they are intelligent. They're not intelligent in the way that you or I are intelligent, or an animal is intelligent. But if intelligence means optimizing your relationship to the world, plants are very good at that. And again, they do that through their chemistry, through their language, which is chemistry, which communicates with everything in their environment, ranging from
Right.
bacteria, fungi in the soil, to insects, to other plants, to animals that might eat them, to us, and basically we're just another category of animal that might want to eat the plant, either for nutrition or because of its effects. So
Right.
anything that you learn from, in some ways, you can conceive as a teacher,
Mm.
and I kind of take that view. If I read a book and I learn from it, the book in some ways is a teacher. I have learned from it. So in that context, plants can certainly be teachers. Are they intelligent beings that actively interact with us? Well,
Right.
people who do psychedelics often think so. That's their experience, And some of
Yeah.
my, some people say, well, it's not really the plant, it's you, you're learning from yourself. It's an aspect of the self, and the plant just gives access to a part of the self that is not usually, open. But I think it's a matter of debate. I think you could argue either way. And
What's your personal touch to it, like your personal experience? Like you mentioned other people's perspective, but like with your research of 40 years and participating with plants and connecting with them, do you think that these plants are intelligent entities that you can communicate and cooperate with, just like you could, for example, with another human being?
yes, in some ways I do.
Okay.
I don't ask myself, I mean, I don't spend too much time wondering, do they have an intelligence that's outside of us, or are they, I mean, they clearly do, and there's scientific evidence to prove now, there's quite a body of evidence to prove that they interact with everything in the environment in a way that you could characterize as intelligence.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think it's more important in this I thou dynamic that plants can set up with you when you're in psychedelic state and having this relationship, and you may feel that you're really in telepathic or some other kind of communication with the plant, but it's not, that is not so important. What's more important is, what information are you getting from this interaction? Is the information good?
Right.
And are you learning from it? And if you're learning from it, well, why not say it's the plant teacher?
Right.
It's a shorthand way of saying what that relationship is. So I don't really have the problem with the idea that
Right.
plants are teachers.
I mean, we're talking about intelligence, and if you look at our human civilization currently, we still haven't mastered renewable energy production. And you look at plants, they've mastered energy production by converting it from the sun. And as an intelligence perspective, it's like, who really is more intelligent? The ones that are running around still trying to figure out how to turn the light bulb on, or the ones who have already figured out that they are the light bulb, and we just got to tap into it to recycle that energy.
Well, I think you know the answer, right? I mean, plants have figured out how to tap solar energy, take that solar energy and through photosynthesis, bind it into the biosphere, bind it into the ecosystem by using that energy to convert carbon dioxide into complex organic chemistries. And then everything runs on that. And organic compounds are, I mean, we are chemical machines that run on organic compounds essentially, and plants are the key process by which energy is brought into the biosphere, from the cosmos, from the solar system, and is essentially transmuted, translated into a useful form, in the
Right.
form of chemical energy.
Yeah.
And incidentally, I mean, it's kind of a miracle when you think about it, because plants
It
not
is. It
only
really is.
they sequester carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but one of the key byproducts, one of the side products of photosynthesis, is oxygen.
Mm,
That's what's left over in the chemical reaction. Well, oxygen happens to be quite useful for us and everything
right.
else that breathes, right?
Yeah.
So it's a complementary and truly symbiotic relationship.
When I'm out hiking normally, I look into like all these leaves and I see the sun going through these leaves, and I'm like, man, these are like little solar panels. And the plant,
Yeah,
it's like a little factory. It's like a little industry, right? And this industry is doing different things. Like one industry is creating perfumes, for example, to create scent so that it can, like we were talking about before, distribute the seeds for certain animals, so on and so forth.
yeah.
And it's like these plants are operating in a really intelligent fashion, but it's very hard for us to conceive because we define intelligence through economies, through finances, through businesses. But it's like maybe we just need to look a bit deeper at what these plants are doing and how they're doing it.
Yes, to look for plants do it in a chill way. They do it in a very low key way. They don't make a
Yeah,
big
yeah, that's
fuss
it.
about it. They just
That's it.
do it. And
Yeah.
it's interesting that you mentioned this. When I was a graduate student, undergraduate student studying botany, it was always kind of puzzling to me because in the biology department I was in, like maybe there were a dozen, maybe 20 graduate students studying botany, and maybe there were 60 or 70 graduate students studying zoology. And the question always was, well, how come there are so many more zoologists? And the zoologists say, well, plants don't do anything, but actually they do. You just have to look closer. If you look like you see, the sunlight shining on a leaf, there's a lot of stuff going on inside that leaf,
Mm,
with photosynthesis, but you have to look at it from the molecular level,
right.
and if you get down to that level, you realize it's a powerhouse of energy transduction. I had one of my most profound ayahuasca experiences of my life is when I was given a molecule's eye view of photosynthesis. And it was amazing. And
Okay.
I've written about it. I'm not going to narrate it. I won't bother you, but I've written about it in my books, and
Maybe just give us a brief.
it really helped me appreciate what plants do.
Yeah. I feel like that you hit the nail on the coffin when you said they're very low key, they're very subtle. And it's almost like, doing ayahuasca ceremonies, what it's taught me is the subtlety that humans possess, the subtle energies that are functioning underneath our psyche that are available to us, but because of our sort of default mode network, we're just blocking out those other realities. And potentially there could be worlds and other dimensions that are inhabiting these chemical realities within us and plants. We just got
Yeah.
to look.
Well,
So
yes, that's
that
right.
bring that brings me to question two. Can our method of communication with plants be more elaborate, just as elaborate as like communicating with other humans? Like, can you speak to plants like, "Hey, man, how you doing? How's your day?" In that sense, what's your take on that?
Do we interact with plants in the same way?
Yes.
You mean? Well, maybe, maybe to a certain extent, you don't interact with them exactly like that, but you can interact with an individual plant. For example, what you mentioned, like the way a flower smells, like fragrance compounds and all that. This is all about the secondary chemistry, and these essential oils that plants produce, you know, they produce them as attractants, usually mostly for insects. They don't care if they smell good to us, or maybe they do. They smell good to us. So they are a chemical messenger. You appreciate the plant because of its fragrance, maybe its appearance also. Its appearance is
Mm,
also a chemical property because it's the pigments in the plant that refract and reflect light in a certain way. So what makes a plant attractive doesn't even have to involve, a drug effect. I guess the fragrance is in some ways a drug effect, but these things make us appreciate the plant, and if we appreciate it, we want it around us. And if we want it around us, then we grow it or we, seek it out. All of this works for the plants, as soon as because in some ways we protect the plant. It doesn't have to compete in the environment the way it used to. If we domesticate a plant, that's like for the plant, it's like it gets on easy street. It doesn't have to compete in the wild
it's like a
because
house
we're
pet.
going to take care of it, and we
Yeah.
adopt it essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's got an easy road, at least until we completely destroy the planet. And then, of course, everything, then it's all up for grabs. But for the moment,
You went from
for the
light to
moment,
dark real quick.
yeah, it's got, for the moment, it's got an easy ride for it. Damn, this damn thing. I don't know how I can make this thing stop. Anyway, maybe somebody else answered it. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Anyway, so yeah.
All right, cool. That brings us to question number three. Have you spoken to Terence since his passing through dreams, through psychedelics, through any sort of
Uh,
intuitive contact?
uh, not not really through psychedelics. I've of course thought of him through on psychedelics. I've thought of him. Uh, but dreams, yes. I don't know if it's communicated with him, but I have had and still have, pretty intense dreams uh about him, or usually it's about the two of us being together, in some situation,
Mm,
and how crazy dreams are, right? But I often dream about him and me being together in some kind of situation. So it's not like dreaming about him, but it's kind of like dreaming, about past experiences that we've had, or experiences that are happening in the dreamscape, that are involve the two of us. But I have similar dreams about my father and my mother and people I've been close to, so
yeah.
I would not call those like, visitations from the spirit world or anything like that, but they are intense dreams,
So
you know
yeah. So
and
have you
it's
had
in.
any visitations from him? Would you say something that's separate to like dreams and just thinking about him? Like, have you had like a visceral experience of him trying to contact you? Like, Dennis, don't eat my sandwich in the fridge. I'm sick of your shit.
No- Nothing like that.
Nothing like
Really,
that at all.
really, nothing like that. I haven't really had those kinds of, those kinds of interactions. I mean, I think, I don't know if people persist beyond death or not, but if they do, I have a feeling that they're not that interested in us. I mean, they've gone to some other place and it's either much better or much worse than it is, but I don't think there's too much exchange, at least not that I can tell, you know.
Mm,
Uh, yeah, I just don't know. I mean, I think there are sometimes, you know, phenomena around people's deaths that are sometimes kind of hard to explain. Then the notion that it takes you about, after you die, it takes about 4 days to cross over. Cross over to where is not really defined, and I just think we don't really know. But I can't, I can't point to anything where, you know, my brother in a dream or something like that has told me something like, you remember that thing that I buried at the base of the tree in our backyard 50 years ago? If you go to this tree and you look, you'll find, a statue of St. Christopher or something like that. Never anything that clear, you know.
mm,
So I don't know. Have to be a skeptic about it.
fair enough. Fair. Is that skepticness yourself, or is it the narrative society will appreciate you with?
Well, uh, not everybody is I think skepticism, or what sometimes called reductionism, or sometimes called I think I think that it is not, you don't want to get trapped in it necessarily. uh it's good to keep an open mind, but it's
Right.
also good to keep your skeptical antennas well tuned, you know. I mean, that's the scientific attitude, and I'm trained as a scientist, you know, but as a person, so my first approach when I look at a phenomenon and so on is say, well, you know, we don't, I mean, you don't have to necessarily immediately invoke the supernatural, even for phenomena that we don't really understand very well. You know, it's the old Occam's razor approach. What is the simplest explanation that explains the phenomenon? It's good to start there. That doesn't
Mm,
mean that it's adequate. There may be aspects of it that it doesn't explain. And then you have to say, what are the limitations of this understanding? This is what science is all about. You know, you construct hypotheses, you construct a supposition. Really, that's all a hypothesis is. You construct a supposition about the way something is, you know, a chemical reaction or a, you know, whatever process in nature you're looking at. And you can say, you know, here's what I can observe, what explains this. And if you know, the facts do not demand anything beyond, you know, this more or less hypothetical model you've created, then you can assume that it's probably valid. It's
yeah,
explained
yeah,
what you know. But you always have to work in the light of the perception that you never completely understand something, right? And you never prove anything in science. You only don't disprove. That's the thing. You work
right,
with a hypothesis until facts or observations come along that don't fit the hypothesis. And then you either have to expand it or modify it or shit can it completely and come up with a new hypothesis. That is the essence of science, of the scientific process.
right.
And I think taking psychedelics, you know, as a scientist, I think all scientists need to take psychedelics because, you know, if they're looking at nature, I think it's important for them to realize the limitations of scientific knowledge. You know, I mean, science has explained a lot about nature, about the way things are, but there's an infinity of things left to know that science doesn't even try to address, like consciousness, for example. I mean, it tries. So far, it's failed to explain just what the hell consciousness is, you know,
Yeah,
but we know it exists because here we are having this conversation and we're both conscious beings, you know. I mean, we're not AIs, at least I'm pretty sure I'm not, and I'm willing to grant that you're
exactly.
not.
See, that's where
So
I think you're. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's where I think you're a bit different is because you're the conventional scientist, but then I also believe you're like a consciousness scientist too, which has participated in activities that has broadened his observation techniques and mechanisms through psychedelics, which allows you to question the more greater philosophical understanding of who we are as beings,
right.
meaning that there's this sort of overlap between the traditional scientists where they're not willing to look out of the box of their framework of reference. But that box very quickly gets dissolved when you participate in some sort of activity that alters your consciousness.
That's
In
right.
in that sense, do you ever feel like it's a bit of a mental matrix, like a trap you can get caught in science where it won't allow you to think beyond the limitations the narrative wants you to think?
Well, yes, I think it can be. I mean, if you let it, you know, the important thing is to, just as it's important to remain skeptical and remain, you know, keep your analytical faculties well tuned, but it's also important to constantly remind ourselves of the limitations of our knowledge, you know, and that, you know, whatever model we're working with when we try to explain reality, we have to, we have to acknowledge that it is incomplete. We don't, and it always will be incomplete. There'll always be more left to know. So you're always, sort of constructing this model understanding of the way nature is. And the problem is that many scientists, do not pursue science with this idea. They get the idea that, well, we pretty much got this thing figured out, and I am totally against that. No, you only have a very tiny amount of the way
Right.
reality is figured out, and even that is subject to questioning and revision and so on. That's the true scientific attitude, I believe, and I think the great scientists, not that I'm a great scientist, but the great scientists, they come at this from the same perspective. They're always curious, and they always realize that there's vastly more to be known than is known. I mean, if the part of nature that we think we understand pretty well is a sphere, well, okay, it's a sphere, but there's an infinity of space beyond that sphere. Even though the sphere is expanding rapidly, there will still be a vast amount that's left unexplained. And this is a good thing. For one thing, it keeps scientists employed, asking these questions. But for another, I think it gives us a useful humility. I mean, as a species, we tend to be a little arrogant about how cool we are, how much we know. I think scientists are particularly prone to this, and it's important to always keep in mind how little we know. If I have one lesson, the take-home lesson from psychedelics, that would be it. The most profound trips I've had, the most revelatory trips have always been, effectively this reminder, remember how little you know. And sometimes it's gentle, and sometimes it's like it hits you upside the head because that's what you need. But it's important. I think that's one of the big insights from psychedelics, is that
Right.
the world's vastly more marvelous and complicated and astonishing than we can comprehend, which is not to say we shouldn't try, but it's it's a journey that never really ends. But so the thing is to enjoy the journey, enjoy the process of trying to understand, knowing that we're not ever going to get it all figured out, and that's just fine.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're a great scientist, and just having the wisdom and the perspective of being able to have an open mind towards the practice that you've been participating in for 40 years, towards other practices, that is the hallmark of a great scientist. It begins from the thought in itself to be open to new knowledge. So,
That's the important thing. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Well, thank you. I'll have to write to Stockholm and let them know about that.
Don't worry, I got your back on that one. Say sponsored by Ham. All right. Question four, final question. Dennis, if you could give your 20-year-old self one bit of advice, what would it be? And this advice, it can be something that will benefit them here on Earth. And if you believe life goes on after Earth, then something that will also benefit them in all the other afterlives or whatever happens.
One piece of advice that I would tell my 20-year self,
Yeah.
20-year-old self.
Like imagine 20-year-old Dennis just with you right now in that tree. And he's like, yo, Dennis, hook me up, man. Give me the goods.
Oh boy, it's hard to say. Well, it's hard to say. I would say eat better and get more exercise.
Nice and simple. Yeah.
Remember that your body is the only one you're going to have, and take good care of it. That's good advice. And I'd be, now that I'm 72, I'm beginning to realize realize if I had, I'd be in better health, and that's important. I mean, I'm in basically good health, but there are a few things that have come up. So, these things start to come up. So if you're young, you can take steps, and who knows, who knows what's going to happen. Just excuse me, it doesn't, if you do have a great diet and get lots of exercise, that doesn't mean you're going to live long and be healthy, but it increases your chances, but then we're always reading about people that, athletes and so on, that collapse at age 20, and so you're not protected, but you do what you can to maintain this body, because this is the machine we live in, and when that machine doesn't work so good, then you got problems.
Do you fear death?
Do I see that?
No, do you fear death?
Do I fear it?
Yeah.
Do I fear death?
Yes.
I don't think so. I mean, and maybe it's a hard question to ask, or to answer, because I can think of death in the abstract, and even knowing that, I probably have, certainly I don't have decades left, maybe a couple of decades at the most. I don't fear death on a day-to-day basis. Maybe when I'm dying, I will fear death, but even then, I don't think so.
Would
I don't
you
really fear it. I think it's important to, just be grateful for the life that you've had, and when your time comes, your time comes.
yeah,
That's the way of it.
right on. If you had the opportunity to link your mind with AI, would you do it?
To upload my consciousness.
To link it with AI now, so do the neural link. So pretty much become a cyborg.
Uh, I thought you were only going to ask me 4 questions.
These are meta
Uh,
questions.
I can't answer that. I think that it'll depend on the state of the art, when it comes to that. I mean, I might consider it, uh, but I don't think the technology is far enough along to, to do it. There was interesting, there's been a couple of interesting science fiction novels about this very thing, and I can't think of. Are you a science fiction fan?
My life science fiction.
Yeah, well, I've been reading it all my life. One of them I remember is by Neil Stevenson. It's called Dodge in Hell. It's
Okay.
called The Fall, Dodge in Hell, and it's about exactly this billionaire tech entrepreneur that dies, and he has it all set up to have his consciousness transferred into, some sort of AI cloud, and they do this, and it's a very interesting novel. It's quite interesting. The other one, it was much earlier, and it was actually by an Australian fellow, Australian science fiction writer that I admire very much. His name is Greg Egan. Are you
Okay.
familiar with,
Greg
his work?
Egan. Yes, Greg
Greg
Egan.
Egan,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
He writes incredible science fiction. And I mean, he writes science fiction that is so complex. I mean, I can't even understand it, some of the stuff he writes about. But early on, like in the mid-90s, he wrote a science fiction novel, and I can't remember what it was called. I'll look it up on the web and send you the name, but it was about this very thing. It was about this guy that had been transferred into a artificial, in some sort of upload, but it was crude, and it was full of glitches, and it was always glitching out, and it was a fantastic book.
Was it Reach
And
for Infinity?
what's that?
Was it Reach for Infinity?
No, I don't think so. I'll have to, let me see. Let me see if I can. Oh, come on. Jeez.
Mutation. There's another really good series on Netflix. I don't know if you're on that, but it's called Altered Carbon. It's a dystopian future sci-fi where individuals have the option to leave their bodies and enter different sleeves. So
Yeah,
it's a lot about dimensional traveling and interdimensional movements and interplanetary
I'm,
travel. It's quite insane the way they showcase it in that theater.
I am pretty sure this was called Quarantine. It was written 1992. Either that or
1992.
yeah, either that or Permutation City. Uh
It's weird
Quarantine.
because it almost seems like the themes that books and movies talk about are the ones that are being created. A lot about
Yeah,
quarantine, zombie apocalypse came up past few years, and then we had the lockdowns, and then the next thing coming up
sounding
is AI links.
yeah, it I think that, or maybe it was Permutation City. But anyway, it was by him, and I would have to go through these to see, but it was one of those.
All right, that's all right.
Yeah, yeah,
Dennis,
have a look. Very interesting work.
we'll check that out, and we'll make sure for the viewers to check it out.
Now it makes me want to go back and read all these. You
Yeah,
shouldn't have got me started on this.
I actually recently held a debate between a close friend of mine. His name's Jack Napier. Shout out to Jack. He runs a really cool channel called Trip Whip, and he debated he's a psychonaut, and he debated a priest, and it was
He
such
debated who? A
he
priest?
debated, yeah, a priest, a Christian priest.
Oh yeah.
So it was such a theatrical sort of event because the priest had some really good perspectives because he had participated in psychedelics before also. And he was so
Mhm.
charming, he convinced people in the crowd to follow his religion. Like people were coming up to me and they were like, dude, that priest was so cool. Like Jack did an excellent job also. I'll give you a share on that one too. Check it out. Also, if you wanted to talk about any of the projects that you're up to, uh, please feel free to share.
Well, I told you I have this McKenna Academy of Natural Philosophy, and this conference that we did last May, espd55.com. People should take a look at that.
Okay.
And then within that, we have a project going on called Bionosis. Uh,
Bionosis.
yeah, I'm putting them in the chat thing. So Bionosis, I mean, it has a cool name, but what it basically is it's ethnopharmacology. It's has to do with trying to preserve and collect traditional knowledge of plants, ethnopharmacology. That's basically what I am. So and it has to do with working with a university in Peru that has this herbarium. And I've actually worked with the curator of the herbarium for over 50 years.
All right.
I mean, I was a graduate student when I first went to Iquitos to do my work, and this guy was also a student at the time. So we're about the same age. We've been friends for that long, and we've collaborated on different projects. And one of the big projects I want to do through the McKenna Academy is get enough resources to digitize that herbarium and put it online to as a way to preserve the knowledge about these plants, these collections in the herbarium, but then link that to all the traditional folk knowledge that is associated with it. So it's, it's an important project as far as preserving knowledge and bridging traditional knowledge with scientific knowledge, and that's kind of what I'm doing with that project. And it's not as sexy maybe as working with psychedelics directly, but it has to do indirectly with psychedelics, and it's an important at least this is our ambition to get the resources to really make this herbarium like a world-class resource for learning. And we have this idea of creating what we call the virtual rainforest, which is would be an AI-driven VR representation of the area of the rainforest where these collections were made. Basically, most of them are around Iquitos in Loreto province. Wow. So you'd be able to move into this environment in an immersive, VR state and look at all these collections, and each collection, each specimen in the herbarium has a story behind it. I mean, it wouldn't be there if somebody didn't bother to collect it. So they collected it. So at least it's got the date, where, who collected it usually, and sometimes information about what it's used for. So that but then you can use that collection to link to all sorts of scientific databases and databases, ethnobotanical databases, and so on. So each collection in this virtual environment becomes, a specific specimen, but also a link to this like meta universe of information that they're immersed in. Thanks.
That's awesome.
Internet. So that's the idea.
Yeah. It's all kind of like a game, like a completely new level of a game opening up.
Yeah. This is what this technology makes possible. So that's our main project, among others, but that's probably the main one. The idea of an academy is we're all about education, so, and we're about education about plants and psychedelics and preserving traditional knowledge about them and so forth.
Excellent. Dennis, thank you so much. Guys and girls, I'll leave all the links below. Check out Dennis's work. He's been an absolute pioneer in his research and his contribution to the plants. I think the plants have done a great job in commissioning you to go out and spread the seeds, Dennis. And again, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Let me know when the podcast's up so we can put it on our social media.